planet has officially entered into a climate emergency. Only a massive transformation in the global economy can deliver adequate answers to the challenges we face. Many countries lack the opportunities and resources to achieve this. Effective and long-term climate action requires a major investment on a global scale. Since 2008, the $8.5 billion Climate Investment Funds has received funds from 14 donor countries and implemented over 300 projects in 72 middle and low-income countries projects through 6 MDBs. This low-cost, long-term investment enables the shift to low-carbon and climate-resilient development, accelerating climate action through a just transition. CEIF's highly competitive financing reduces risk for investors, facilitating additional inflow of capital. Every $1 invested brings in $8 co-financing. Lowering barriers to piloting new technologies, scaling up proven solutions, opening up sustainable markets. Independent evaluations have shown that CEIF has succeeded in accelerating progress in the areas of clean technologies, energy access, climate resilience, and sustainable forests, and resulting in transformational changes with long-term benefits. We invest in the future. Join us.
A very warm welcome to the Climate Investment Fund hosted Nature Day event. To set the scene, I'd like to invite Ms. Vinzi Alnen. Vinzi is a youth climate activist from Papua New Guinea. She is taught, inspired and motivated with the spoken word, and she's currently the country coordinator for the Sustainable Ocean Alliance PNG Hub. Please, Vinzi.
So this is called The Balance. The constellation led us to anywhere we needed to go. Stars forming patterns that told us to go east, west, left, or right. The rustle of the leaves in the forest, the waves crashing onto the shore told stories to my grandmother. She said these stories were not like the fairy tales that we have become accustomed to, but these were stories of wisdom from our forefathers, tales of warfare, famine, and of a lifestyle so deeply rooted in culture that even the Mariana Trench envied its depth. She told me the relationship was so strong that the trees and the oceans would often get jealous when we strayed. But her words fell on deaf ears. But the ocean listened, and so did the trees and the forests, and the land of our forefathers were connected to. Once we were pure, once untouched, and once pristine, an embodiment of innocence, now compromised. Technology, a word so often associated with advancements, betterment, and help, have caught us in a web that we got stuck in. Proving that the Maslow's hierarchy was indeed true, we kept expanding in needs, our wants, and our selfish desires. Neglected our culture, neglected the forces that fed our ancestors. Agriculture, an essence of our existence, slowly taking away our forests and its lush biodiversity. Farming the land for our food. School fees and necessities, a very complicated situation. As each season comes and goes, we were faced with land that is decreasing value. Oh, how disappointed our ancestors will be. And before I knew it, my grandmother's warning rang in my ear as we watched the villagers pass pots to each other as the waves came crashing into our homes, taking lives and taking away our land. We heard earthquakes with magnitudes 7, 8, and 9, breaking scales, tsunamis claiming lives, thousands of lives. Soil quality decreasing to a point where many villages are now hungry. Pristine rivers and yet no access to clean water. And all this was happening as technology was trying to solve these problems, we realized yet again another crisis. Languages lost with the islands that sank, cultures altered to a point where even my elders do not recognize them anymore. A mess, but not even a beautiful mess. A mess only a miracle could solve. Hopeless, lonely, and clueless, we have become a disgrace to our forefathers. But my grandmother also told me that the ocean showed mercy to those who wanted to help. I realized that the ocean and the forests forgave and showed compassion. Prolonging the lives of my elders, we worked together with the creators of technology. Before the ocean swallowed us, we mended the bridges that needed to be mended, explored our lives back then, nature-based solutions, using the land and seas in a way where they replenish and not perish and leave us without options. While my grandmother said technology was a curse, it did show us that balance. Gadgets to detect these earthquakes before they strike kept us on alert. Technology gave women a space at the table. It gave young people like myself a space to express ourselves. Technology, my grandmother added, gave the thoughts of women and the non-initiated their thoughts. It gave them life. Making decisions that affected us, we were no longer kept in the dark. We were given room to shine. Technology allowed us to reflect, to revive the oceans and the forests, introduced us to new ideas on how to have multiple uses of land, sustainable landscaping for the betterment of our people and our future, allowed us to be one with nature again, but this time to do it in today's circumstances. And although my grandmother gave me warnings of the dangers of technology, I am equipped enough to know that I have found the balance where technology and culture meets. One cannot live without the other. Like the oceans and forests relied on us and we on them. And as I listened to the rustle of the leaves and the crashing of the waves, I heard the ocean and the forest murmur in agreement. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Vinzi. That's really inspiring, thought-provoking words, really wonderful, and a really great start to this session. The world is facing a triple emergency of climate change, nature loss, and rising poverty and inequality, and these issues are highly interconnected. So tackling these crises require an interconnected approach. We need solutions that get to the heart of the collective issues, and while there are no silver bullets, we know that working with the power of nature, drawing on the knowledge and experience of local and indigenous peoples and their culture, offer locally led solutions to the triple crises, because these communities don't see these issues in silos, they work on them together. So today we're going to hear a little bit about the experience of the 8.5 billion funds, the climate investment funds, established in 2008. One of the 4 global multilateral climate finance mechanisms supporting 72 developing countries seeking to shift to low carbon and climate resilient development and to accelerate climate action. So we're going to be hearing about a decade of experience and how over $56 billion have been mobilized in private and public funds. So first of all, the 766 million forest investment program has been tackling forest loss and degradation by empowering local communities and developing an empowerment pathway for accreditation under their direct grant mechanism. And this has enabled the reach to organise local communities and indigenous peoples. And secondly, the 1.2 billion pilot programme for climate resilience is helping developing economies adapt to the impacts of climate change. So we'll be hearing about the insights from these 2 approaches that are being fed into a new incubator to rapidly accelerate climate resilience, the Nature, People and Climate Investment Programme. And against the backdrop of a planet on which 75% of total land-based environment and 66% of the marine environment has been severely altered by human activity, today's high-level panel will showcase lessons on this decade of experience in sustainable forest management and resilient development and highlight the unique need for this new programme. So please welcome me in welcoming our please join me in welcoming our distinguished panellists. His Excellency Pierre Nelchars, Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change at Jamaica. Welcome. His Excellency Simeon Sawadogo, Minister of Environment, Green Economy and Climate Change from Burkina Faso. Dr. Sanjayan, from the Chief Executive Officer for the Conservation International. And Mr. Hamdou Dorsuma, sorry, I should have practiced before, Agriculture Director and Manager for Climate and Green Growth, African Development Bank. Thank you all for joining us. So first, Your Excellency, so our first question would be around looking at the CIF support to Jamaica over the last 10 years. Could you share your pointers for promoting nature-based solutions, harnessing the lessons and models tested through these climate-resilient operations?
Well, let me firstly express gratitude for the invitation to sit on this panel. Listening to the poem a while ago from the young climate champion really reflects on the importance of the CIF and on the remarkable understanding of how to make our solutions sensible. Because sometimes we try to solve problems and end up inadvertently creating more problems. Yeah. But the goal of nature-based solutions and this entrenched relationship that we've had for 10 years defines a way to define solutions that are sensible and sustainable, and that really represent and understand the connection needed between government and the MDBs and the people and the community, building up their capacity to be able to make those solutions work for them. So, you know, I am very grateful. I want to thank the Climate Investment Funds and all Excellency and colleagues on the panel. And as you said, we have enjoyed a 10-year relationship. Jamaica is one of the most vulnerable countries in terms of the impact, negative consequences of climate change. And so I'm very, very pleased to see the CIF programmatic approach, an approach which really brings strategic value to countries like Jamaica and ensures that we have a process that advances trust and collaboration. And you see it in the programs that we've developed in Jamaica. You see the effect and the impact. We look on 2 of the 4 projects that have focused on the critical sector of agriculture and fisheries. Sectors that we need in Jamaica, particularly because of our characteristics and our dependency on these sectors for our GDP and just for life. So our country is one which our best assets, which is where we are located, are also what makes us the most vulnerable. And so we feel the effects of the stronger hurricanes and the severe flooding and the prolonged droughts and the sea level rise. And so all of that impacting our agricultural sector means that we have to define ways to get the communities to really create solutions. And that's what the adaptation program and financing mechanism for PPCR has done. It's a program that has been implemented in rural communities. And I can focus on one, which is the aquaponics program, which we saw 5 aquaponics farms established under the program in 5 rural communities, bringing that technology to farmers and affecting a combined population of more than 10,000 persons in our country. And we have to highlight the advantages to those farmers in terms of boosting their production, 10 times more production under the aquaponics program, with 85 to 90% water conservation and crop yield year around. So what you see is that our farmers in those communities are learning techniques that are using nature in a more efficient way and making them also be able to yield more and see more revenue. Of course, you know, this is a pilot program, and I stop here to just highlight that Jamaica is ready to move from pilot to national programs. And we have also identified the need to target our women and our youth. And in these programs, we had some 138 community members, 76 females that were trained to operate the systems. And at the leadership level, we had 4 females and 1 community male leader. So we understand the importance of it. And there are other nature-based solutions that we've also implemented under that program. I'll just list a few. Reforestation of 15 hectares of forest land in the Clarendon community, establishment of 50 acres of agroforestry in 60 farms in Clarendon as well, construction of greenhouses, the installation of soil erosion control methods, critical for us in our country to have the life barriers, and the development of a 134-hectare marine protected area. So let me close off by saying another great example of the support is seen in the 4.875 million US promoting community-based climate resilience program towards fisheries sector. And my constituency that I lead in Jamaica is one where we are on the most southern coastline of our country. So we have fisheries and fisher folk there. And I see where they have benefited in building awareness and building their capacity to go out and understand the best use and best practices when it comes onto nature-based solutions in the fisheries sector. There's a lot much more that we can say, but I'll leave some for the other panelists, and you can see how excited we in Jamaica are about this program. But I'll leave by saying this 10 years that we've had has been an opportunity. We're looking now towards 10 more years of implementation on scaling up, on building up, on transforming lives. And that's why I am here. I'm here not just as minister. I'm here as a farmer. I'm here as a member of parliament who has seen it firsthand and seen that there's some things we have to fix, but a lot that we're going forward with that is positive.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So, Your Excellency, Simeon Saradogo, Burkina Faso is selected more than a decade ago as one of the initial countries under the Forest Investment Programme and is also a beneficiary of the direct grant mechanism. What lessons can you share from Burkina Faso in driving community-led efforts to reduce deforestation and forest degradation, promote livelihoods and support the country's climate goals?
Merci bien, Madame. Je voudrais dans un premier temps dire merci à l'unité administrative du Fonds d'investissement climatique et les honorables panélistes qui sont avec nous ici et qui vont partager leurs différentes expériences. Et également remercier tout ce monde qui est venu à travers les continents, les océans pour participer à cette COP26 et partager leurs expériences et avoir un espoir pour notre planète. Évidemment, en ce qui concerne votre première question, votre chose, il y a beaucoup de réalisations du PIF, du CIF au Burkina Faso, que nous allons pouvoir partager avec vous. Mais d'ores et déjà, je voudrais rappeler que quand ce programme a été édifié, il s'agissait donc de voir comment on peut préserver les forêts. Et que le Burkina Faso, qui est un pays de savane, donc les gens ont pensé qu'il n'y avait pas de forêt au Burkina Faso. Et que par conséquent, ce programme pouvait ne pas s'intéresser à ces pays-là. Par contre, il faut le connaître, qu'effectivement, nous avons des forêts de savane qui ont besoin d'être protégées et qui participent effectivement à la séquestration des effets à gaz, de gaz à effet de serre et qui peut permettre de sauvegarder un peu la couche d'ozone afin de préserver notre planète. Donc c'est assez important. Au départ, il y a eu beaucoup de bailleurs de fonds qui ont été sceptiques, qui n'ont pas cru à la possibilité pour le Burkina Faso de réaliser des choses. Et pourtant, nous avons pu faire un très grand effort. Donc, depuis les années 1970, nous avons commencé la lutte contre la désertification en préservant donc les différentes forêts sèches que nous avions dans notre zone. Et évidemment, avec l'appui du Fonds d'intervention, d'investissement pour le climat, nous avons pu bénéficier de 4 projets financés à hauteur de 57 millions de dollars US. Ce financement CIF a aidé à sortir les populations de la pauvreté en luttant contre les facteurs qui menacent la survie des forêts et des terres boisées. Parce que nous savons que les forêts sont effectivement les éléments qui permettent à la population de vivre. Donc d'avoir de la nourriture, de se soigner, de se loger et éventuellement de pouvoir avoir de l'air pur pour pouvoir respirer, c'est déjà un élément intéressant. Et je sais que Mafalda, qui a eu l'occasion de venir à Burkina Faso, a visité les réalisations qui ont été faites par ce fonds-là. Je voudrais rappeler ici quelques chiffres, hein, je ne sais pas beaucoup. Nous avons pu obtenir près de 30 parcs de vaccination, donc, afin d'éviter qu'on puisse couper 9000 pieds d'arbres. C'est-à-dire que ces parcs de vaccination ont permis qu'on puisse voir dans le cadre de l'élevage, éviter que les animaux ne fassent une prédation intense sur les forêts. Ça, c'est un élément très important. Nous avons pu mettre 2500 biodigesteurs installés donc pour la préservation de 850 hectares de forêt. Ces biodigesteurs permettent donc de faire de la récupération, de créer donc de l'énergie, au lieu donc d'aller dans la forêt avec le charbon de bois, etc., qui peut nous produire. Il y a bien d'autres éléments tels que nous avons pu créer près de 10 000 emplois verts. Donc ces emplois qui sont liés donc à la préservation de la nature, donc avec la contribution donc, pour éviter la pauvreté en milieu rural. Parce que l'emploi permet d'avoir des ressources, c'est un élément important. Nous avons également donc, beaucoup d'interventions que le PIF a pu faire. Nous lançons économique significative au profit des femmes, les groupes cibles, c'est-à-dire les femmes et les jeunes. Donc cet emploi vert-là, donc c'est surtout ciblé donc, ces groupes vulnérables. Nous avons pu faire donc plus de 12 plateformes pour ces femmes tout justement, donc, qui permettent donc d'avoir des revenus à travers ces plateformes-là. Et de ces femmes, quand ils ont de l'argent, donc ils s'occupent de l'éducation de leurs enfants, eux-mêmes de leurs propres besoins et de la famille. Parce que comme on a l'habitude de dire, nous les hommes, bon, quand on a un peu d'argent, nous on va dehors. Mais quand la femme a de l'argent, elle s'occupe de la famille. Et je pense que ce projet a été très important pour nous. Il y a également le système de paiement des services environnementaux autour de près de 284 hectares de forêt sous aménagement, avec 6 millions de tonnes de carbone donc équivalents donc, qui ont été séquestrés. Vous voyez, c'est des éléments très importants. Donc le Burkina Faso est donc fier des résultats de la contribution du PIF, donc du CIF, donc pour l'atteinte des objectifs globaux de développement au niveau national et particulièrement les objectifs climatiques en termes d'adaptation et d'atténuation, surtout des effets néfastes du changement climatique. Mieux, le financement du PIF a permis d'accompagner donc la préparation de notre RED+, donc, qui est donc au Burkina Faso. L'un des acquis du PIF, le plus important, est la construction du Centre national de formation RED+, qui ambitionne d'être un centre d'excellence sous-régional et même mondial. Ce centre est très important parce que nous avons vu que les différents éléments que nous avons, il manque la formation, il manque l'information. Donc, ce centre-là, donc d'une vocation sous-régionale, qui va prendre en compte notamment la Côte d'Ivoire, le Bénin, le Sénégal, etc. Et bien beaucoup de gens qui envoient déjà des élèves, donc d'être informés. C'est le lieu donc pour nous de remercier au nom du gouvernement burkinabé, donc le CIF pour sa contribution, notamment à travers la Banque mondiale, l'Union européenne, la Banque africaine de développement, donc qui ont été d'un écours ressources. Alors pour finir, je peux dire simplement que nous avons capitalisé tout ça et nous travaillons premièrement à la diffusion des approches innovatrices que nous avons pu engranger lors de la mise en place de ce programme, donc, qui sont donc une approche politique, c'est-à-dire et réglementaire ciblant l'administration publique. C'est-à-dire que nous devons avoir un dispositif normatif qui permet donc aux différents acteurs sur le terrain donc, de s'en servir. Nous avons une approche aussi décentralisée, c'est-à-dire la question donc, des collectivités territoriales, c'est-à-dire les mairies, la population organisée à la base avec les conseillers municipaux qui vont contribuer. Et nous avons une approche communautaire ciblant donc les organisations de la société civile. Enfin, nous avons la possibilité de voir dans quelle manière, donc, en préservant ces forêts, nous pouvons, à travers les produits que nous allons avoir, créer une chaîne de valeur. Une chaîne de valeur, ça veut dire que ce que nous avons, les produits forestiers non liés, comment on peut faire en sorte que ça soit quelque chose de très important. Et là, ce n'est pas le public qui peut le faire, c'est le privé. Donc, nous ciblons le privé donc, comme une structure donc, qui va nous aider donc, à améliorer donc, notre contribution. Je pense que le PIF a été un transformateur, un innovateur, et il a permis donc d'atteindre les objectifs généraux. Il y a l'engagement du pays aussi pour un avenir durable et clair avec la formation de notre CDN et notre PNDS 2. Donc le 2 le 3 décembre à Bruxelles, le gouvernement va présenter un nouveau programme pour 2021 et 2025. Et ce programme-là donc, a comme charte première donc, la préservation de l'environnement. Donc à ce niveau-là, je pense que c'est extrêmement important. Donc nous remercions encore une fois le CIF et dire que nous sommes fiers parce que nous avons donné raison à ceux qui étaient optimistes par rapport au Burkina Faso. Et deuxièmement, ça permet de voir que cet instrument qu'est le CIF-là doit pouvoir encore continuer à apporter sa contribution afin que nous puissions préserver nos zones humides, nos forêts et faire en sorte que les populations en vivent sans donc détruire la nature qui est en fait l'élément protectif donc, de notre planète. Je vous remercie.
Merci. So just to come back to what the lessons are coming from these experiences, starting with Jamaica, what would be your top recommendations for taking these approaches that you've developed and tested under the CIF to take to scale, as you were calling for, sort of nationwide in an integrated and inclusive way?
You know, there's a lot that we have learned in the intricacies of implementing in communities. It exposes the capacity levels and the need for us to really leverage on a sustained way. The thing about it is climate change is connected to all sectors, and so climate solutions are truly connected to all sectors too. And so when you're going into a community to implement, for instance, a nature-based agriculture sustainability program, you have to appreciate now the capacity of the persons who are going to manage the program. Do they have the training? Do they have the understanding? And do you have those facilities set up for that? Do you have the policies and the laws and the regulations that are needed to be conjoined to the investment? That's why the CIF program is not just a one-off program. And what we've learned is the importance of having a long-term sequenced approach that facilitates the true definition of sustainable development in several ways. So the diversification of our own economy in Jamaica will impact how sustainability can be infused in practices like agriculture and fisheries. Raising the level of understanding in terms of our education sector, in terms of our local government sectors, all of those things will impact how we move forward. But I would say leveraging, scaling up, building up requires us to be hyper-focused, not to be deterred by one segment that doesn't work, but to appreciate that nature-based is the newest high-tech. This is the highest form of technology. This is this is technology taking that cycle around. We started off with the sun and the scraping to make fire. Then we had light bulbs, and we're right back to solar panels, where we're focusing on the sun. And this is the highest tech where we are finding ways to utilize most efficiently the natural resources that we cannot create, but we must respect. And I think in the implementation, if we have as I said to you, a long-term sequenced, structured strategy to make those investments work for the people, that's what I've seen as the best approach. And we are ready. I plug it again. Jamaica has gone through 10 years. We've had a 10-year relationship. We've been engaged. We want to get married. We want to go and live and make that work so that we can expand it across the Caribbean. We're ready for that.
Excellent. It's very good to hear. So, okay, we'll move on then to some of the partners in the CIF process. Dr. Sanjan, Conservation International has led this direct grant mechanism approach with the CIF and bringing together learning and knowledge exchange. So given the 12 countries that have had varying levels of success in using this approach, what would you be seeing as the sort of most important elements of getting direct access to finance and engaging those indigenous peoples, local communities in developing and delivering projects so that it really responds to their unique needs and their contexts in advancing the adoption of these high-tech nature-based solutions to climate action?
Well, thank you for giving me the chance to be here with this distinguished panel. The world is awash in money. The reason why we're not making more progress on some of the goals that we've set out for ourselves is not necessarily because there isn't funding, but the funding isn't getting to the people who do the work on the front lines of conservation. And this can be scaled all the way through, from the very ground up to governments and to regions. Africa gets less than the rest. An African country like Burkina Faso gets less than the rest. And then you go down to a community, even less. Then you go down to the person on the ground who's doing the work, it's even less. I think what was genius about CIF and the approach it took was that it not only recognized that there was a need for funding, but it fundamentally understood that we had to come up with a different model. And at that time, I think it was an experiment to see whether we had a different mechanism for delivering funding directly into the hands of indigenous peoples and local communities on the front lines of conservation. That's what the DGM was all about. Now, 5 years down the road, it's obviously clear to me that it's been a resounding success. The great thing about it is it's not us telling communities or indigenous peoples what to do or how to do it. The governing board itself is made up of indigenous communities. A quarter of the governing board is indigenous women, so it has a strong gender angle to it. And when we know that 80% of the irrecoverable carbon on the planet today is in indigenous lands and territories. The vast majority of biodiversity is in indigenous lands and territories. And if you're interested in conservation, frankly, there's not much left out there except for the stewardship that indigenous peoples have held. Clearly, we have to continue to support mechanisms like the DGM that allow that funding to flow directly into the hands of communities and indigenous peoples with as little friction as possible, with as little time lag as possible. And all Conservation International does is essentially play the role of an honest broker or a secretariat, if you will. This is not our money. We have to do the minimum amount necessary to get in the way of that money getting to the communities, the people. Now, I'll tell you one more thing, which was amazing to me. So one of the things that we were amazed at this COP, and I think we're still recovering from it, is the large sums of financial capital that we talked about that are now flowing, whether it's private sector funding or public, institutional, and even private philanthropy that had been now committed. So you all heard, and I think we all celebrated, this $1.7 billion commitment to indigenous peoples and local communities. And the need to support them. So finally, the world is waking up and recognizing that these stewards, the wisdom that they have, and the front lines that they're in conservation ought to be recognized and ought to be supported. However, we didn't hear that much talk about how. So fantastic, we're getting at least a B plus. Let's be generous. We get an A for the funding, but it's an NA. It's almost a no-show yet, right, in terms of how. And I want to offer that the DGM actually provides a great mechanism, an experiment that clearly works, that we can learn from, to set up or expand the DGM or set up similar mechanisms to make sure that the funding that was committed by private and public partners actually gets into the hands of the people who need it most and as fast as possible.
Excellent. Okay, so let me follow that up with how would you going about ensuring that model of participatory and direct grant making can be expanded to constituencies in other climate-themed areas? So, how do we drive that expansion? Are we reliant on you, or are there other ways of doing this?
I hope you're not reliant on just CI, although we are obviously willing to help and contribute as much as we can. So I would say there are two things you would want to think about in general terms. One is decentralization. Think of it regionally, think about it nationally potentially. So decentralization it hedges your bets, and it makes everything work with a local flavor. And two, the governance has to be clear. So governed ultimately by indigenous peoples and local communities, however you set it up.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Dosuma, as a strategic implementing partner of the CIF in those countries, can you share African Development Bank's experience in addressing the multifaceted challenges confronting the Sahel region, addressing climate risks and maintaining healthy ecosystems while providing sustainable livelihoods and tackling youth migration?
Thank you. First, thank you for the opportunity to share our experience with you today, particularly in a region which is really very vulnerable to climate change. I mean the Sahel region in Africa. As you know, this is a region where there is a combination of poverty, a low level of development, and climate impacts. And the region is not receiving, as already mentioned, it's a fair share of for climate finance. Actually, I was looking at the latest data on climate finance access, I think a few days ago, and I observed that last year, a total of 632 billion was provided as climate finance globally. And sub-Saharan Africa received only 20 billion of that. And out of the 20 billion, 2 billion were mobilized domestically. So it leaves you with only 18 billion mobilized from global funds, etc. But the needs of climate finance in this region is huge. So I think this is where, as the first financial institution in the continent, we have been playing a critical role in deploying climate finance. Since the entry into force of the Paris Agreement in 2016, the African Development Bank has mobilized a total of 12.3 billion as climate finance. And we set for ourselves some very ambitious targets on climate finance. The first one is to allocate about 40% of our annual investments as climate finance. We have been on track to meeting that target last year, but because of the COVID situation, I think we didn't meet it. I think we achieved 34%. But if we compare with what we have done, where we were before in 2016, I think a lot of progress has been made. Because in 2016, our share of climate finance was just 9% of our portfolio. But we are on track to meet the same target this year. And moving forward, we have committed to mobilize 25 billion as climate finance by 2025. Now, in terms of our experience with the climate investment funds, we have been implementing CIF programs since 2010, so it's more than 10 years now. So there are a lot of lessons that we can share. And we have been involved in about 39 investment plans in 27 countries across various sectors, including sustainable transport, climate resilience, renewable energy, etc. And let me just give maybe a couple of examples, focusing on that particular region. In the Sahel, we have been involved in 2 key countries, actually. Burkina Faso is here, Niger. In Niger, we have been involved in implementing the PPCR projects, 2 of them, actually, for a total of 35 million. And those 35 million were able to leverage another 90 million as co-financing. So it shows you the leverage ratio from how we use the CIF funds to mobilize additional resources. And in this country, as I mentioned, there were 2 projects we were involved in under the PPCR. The first one is the Climate Information Development and Forecasting Project for about 13 million. And this project was critical to improve the resilience to climate change of local communities by providing reliable climate information. In addition to that, we have another project in Niger. This is a water project of about 22 million, which has been also useful to strengthen the resilience of rural communities, especially when they face climate variability and the climate change impacts. In Burkina Faso, this is where you have the forest investment program. and we have been involved in 2 projects there. The first one is a gazetted forest participatory management project of about 11.5 million. And this project was also critical to reduce deforestation and the degradation of forests in local communities. For Burkina Faso also, there was another project we have been involved in. This is the Burkina Faso climate change mitigation and poverty reduction through development of the cashew sector. So these 2 projects, this last project was also critical to increase carbon sequestration capacity in the country and also reduce poverty. In terms of, let me conclude here by saying that from what I presented, the African Development Bank has been very active in implementing CIF programs in the region. I gave you the example of the 2 countries. So after 10 years, more than 10 years of experience with the CIF, we observed that the CIF has made a lot of impact on the ground. We have been playing an important role in designing and implementing those projects, particularly in the Sahel region. And we are looking forward to really strengthening our investment in that region in the coming years. Let me also mention that recently we have committed to supporting a very important program in the region. This is a Great Green Wall initiative being implemented in the Sahel region across 11 countries, and the bank has committed to mobilize 6.5 billion to support that initiative. Finally, I believe that the lessons that we learn from those CIF programs in the region will be critical in shaping the new program that the CIF is working on nature solutions. And we look forward to building on this experience in order to engage more with the CIF in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. So just on that last point, are there any particular aspects, do you think, of how the CIF has operated to date under the PPCR and the FIP that should be expanded under the new programme? Is there any particular areas that you feel are most important for the Sahel, perhaps?
The most important aspect, I mean, for this region is resilience, adaptation and resilience. As I already mentioned, I mean, these are the countries that are very vulnerable to climate change, despite their little contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, and they don't receive adequate support in terms of climate finance. So I think building resilience in that region is, for me, is a critical issue. And that's the reason why, for us as the African Development Bank, we just adopted our new climate change policy and strategy for the next 10 years. And the first priority in this policy and strategy is boosting adaptation and resilience. And currently at COP, we are championing a big initiative we call Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, with the aim to mobilizing 25 billion as climate finance up to 2025 to scale up adaptation actions across Africa, and particularly in the Sahel region. So for me, adaptation and resilience are very critical, especially in that very vulnerable region of the Sahel.
Thank you so much. So, okay, I'm going to reflect on what I think I've heard. I mean, we have a whole lot of countries hopefully stepping up over the next couple of days with more adaptation finance for the developing countries, and we really do need that. We need to get to that balance we're promised under the Paris Agreement. And so the things that I've heard, the advice from this room, from this high-level panel, for those donors who are beginning to think about where to put their funding. One, I think the point that nature-based solutions perhaps is the new high-tech approach, so we could be using it much more widely. We also heard that money's not getting where it matters, but that we have approaches to do that. The direct grant mechanism was a resounding success. And this importance of getting the governance right, of getting those that are going to be affected by the impacts, actually part of the management of the finance. So that experience of having Indigenous peoples and women actually representing their communities on the boards and making decisions. the importance of reducing friction and increasing the speed, and the role that decentralisation, the ways that governments are already getting finance down to the local level, and we could expand on that. We also heard about inclusivity, the importance of engaging women, of engaging the youth, I think particularly from Burkina Faso. I was really interested also with this idea of really focusing on a programmatic approach. I think this importance of really thinking about more coherent approaches, thinking about the long term, thinking about the sequence, and building trust and collaboration was another point. Because if we're going to reach rural communities at real scale and with a deep enough intervention that's going to really make a difference to poverty as well as to climate, as well as to the protection of nature, we're going to have to work much faster and at a much bigger scale. So also the points about needing to get the policies right, needing to get the capabilities right, are enormously important. And all of this, the experience that we had today, showing how much value we can add if we bring those ideas of bringing poverty and ecological outcomes together, and carbon sequestration and resilience. So it did feel to me that we've got a lot of lessons here for those that are about to invest in the future in a broader set of countries. And the importance also of thinking about this in terms of diversifying the whole economy. This isn't just a few communities, this is about whole of government, whole of society change. So Mafalda Duarte, it's lovely to have you join us on the panel. So the opinion seems to be we're getting an A maybe for funding, but we've got a lot more to do on the how. What would you like to offer as the experience from the CIF?
So first of all, let me thank you for moderating this panel so well, and thank honorable ministers and Sanjay for being here with us, and also the colleague from African Development Bank. It's a real honor. And for me, this is my last event at the COP this year, and I couldn't have wished for a better event, because what I appreciate the most is actually talking about the actual results, and hearing from the countries, and in this case from CI, about actually what's happening on the ground and the results that we are achieving. The climate investment funds, when they were set up to be a bit disruptive, and to test a different business model and test pioneering approaches to doing things and getting climate results on the ground. And let us not forget, I like to say this often, that these funds were established on the back of a financial crisis in 2008. And so what we are seeing happening right now in developing countries is at it has a much larger impact, but developing countries were facing serious difficulties at the time as well. And so we were set up to spearhead and pioneer investments in a variety of sectors, and do so through this programmatic approach that we are talking about here, and that we hear often, being spoken about, but it really makes a difference. It makes a difference when we bring the critical stakeholders together, and we allow the process to be what it needs to be in each country. So we have the flexibility, we have the resources at scale, which are important at a certain scale, but we bring the critical stakeholders together, but we have the flexibility to allow it to be what it needs to be, and allow it to take as long as it needs to take, to come back to us with a coherent set of investments that can really be transformative. And and hearing about, so when we set ourselves to do this, we didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And we were testing an approach where we were also bringing the multilateral development banks to work together, in partnership with the governments, with the countries under their leadership. And so even that was something that, hadn't really been done before. And we are now seeing the results of also having them come together and bring their comparative advantage to bear, in addition to their financial resources. Here we have the Honorable Minister from Jamaica and from Burkina Faso, and they have brought the experience of their own countries from our resilience program and from the forestry program side, the forest investment program side. And Sanjay was talking about DGM, Dedicated Grant Mechanism for Indigenous People and Local Communities, which is really a pearl often people call it a pearl in the context of the climate investment funds, because there again, we were testing something that had never been done. And initially, when we set this mechanism, when we set ourselves to deliver on this mechanism, we went through a lengthy process of supporting the indigenous people come up with the mechanism, come up with the governance and the implementation arrangements that they thought were going to lead to success and results in their communities. And we did this across the globe, so all of the regions with the representatives. It took several years to get to that point, and we were having some of the other stakeholders starting to become anxious. Why is this taking so long? Why is this taking so long? This again just demonstrates sometimes we have to invest a little bit more up front and take a little bit longer to then have a significant impact. Because, and we have done several evaluations of the mechanism, it is bringing about significant impact. And this is directly we are providing resources directly to these representatives of the indigenous communities, of indigenous people and local communities, through governance and implementation arrangements that they have themselves agreed upon. So I think, there are a number of, and as I said, so to me, this being my last event at the COP couldn't have been more rewarding to actually hear about the results. What we are setting ourselves to do now is, with our new Nature, People and Climate Investment Program, is learn from all of this, draw from all of these lessons that we've gathered, and let us take it to the next level. And we very much hope to work with the countries where we have already been successful, but we've also learned things that need to be improved upon, and how we take it to the next level. Because here we are in a COP talking about ambition and trillions from private capital and all of that, but in the end of the day is how do we translate that into impact on the ground? It's action, and that's what we will continue to be focusing on.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
She said it all.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. Brilliant.